She had simply craved a peaceful afternoon with her father in the park. A little girl mute since birth, seated on a bench as the world whirled by her. But on this particular day, something impossible occurred. A stranger, someone society habitually condemned based on the color of his skin, moved in closer. And in that moment, the impossible became possible. Her father froze, his world shattered, and the truth about prejudice revealed in the most unexpected fashion. What happened that day was greater than coincidence. It was a wake-up call, and once you hear it, you'll never see silence or racism the same again. It was to be a quiet day. A successful entrepreneur, proud of all he had accomplished, wanted nothing more than to spend quiet hours with his little girl. She had been born different, her voice trapped since birth, her silences echoing through spaces words never could. He adored her, but behind his proud smile ran an ongoing hurt, the fear that she would never speak. The park was their refuge. Green expanses of lawns, children playing, people picnicking. For him, an opportunity to forget boardroom pressure and bank balances. For her, a space where laughter filled the air, though she could not join it. They strolled hand in hand, the sunlight warm on the trees. To the world, they were picture perfect, a wealthy father and his darling daughter, with a life that others only imagined. But beneath that smooth veneer was something he would never own up to. A low-key prejudice he had harbored for years, having been influenced by whispers and cautions, by things he was taught without question. And on that day, in that park, his quiet daughter was on the cusp of an encounter with a person who would blow apart everything he believed he understood about race, privilege, and even the boundaries of her own voice. He never knew one interaction, so bland upon first glance, would unravel his most entrenched fears and force him to see the world differently forever. The father sat on a park bench, fingering his costly watch as his daughter played silently with a stick in the ground. The world was an orderly place to him, money fixed things, reputation protected him. But what he didn't realize was that, mere feet away, an instant was about to test each conviction he harbored. A man came over. His clothing was tattered, his complexion dark, his arrival instantaneously eliciting glances from the other families who were spread about the lawn. The businessman tensed, holding his daughter tighter, automatically protecting her, as if menace had breached their nice little bubble. His heart began to beat faster, not because the stranger had done anything inappropriate, but because of all the things he'd learned to fear. The stranger dropped down onto one knee, smiling quietly at the level of the child's eyes. He did not say a word, he just smiled, holding out his hand and presenting her with a little flower, pulled from the ground. Her father stood stock still, panic running through him. Should he step in? Should he shout? His brain screamed, "Protect her," but something in the man's quietness restrained him. And then it happened. The girl, silent her whole life, gazed into the stranger's eyes. Her lips quivered. A broken but unmistakable sound escaped her lips. It was a word. Her very first word. The father's heart pounded in his chest. He'd pleaded doctors, paid experts, crossed oceans for remedies. And yet here, in the heart of a public square, it was this stranger, a black man, shunned and prejudged by society, who had accessed her in a manner no one else could. But rather than rejoicing, murmurs of discontent circulated through the park. Families gawked, shaking their heads, yanking their children in the other direction. The businessman felt the weight of their glances bearing down upon him. His daughter had not been healed in their eyes. She had been tainted. He yearned to rise, to express gratitude to the man, to hug the miracle in front of him, but fear fixed him to the bench. What would others say? What would his fellow workers do if they knew his daughter's initial word belonged to a man the world outside him marginalized as less? The stranger, who remained kneeling, did not catch the judgment that hung in the air. He only noticed the child's smile, the shine of her eyes, the break of her little voice. He spoke softly, something gentle, not for anybody else, but for her. The father was torn. Part of him seethed with pride and happiness, The other, tainted by prejudice, urged that he withdraw her. And as the air in the park weighed more heavily with each moment, as the silence of judgment descended, he knew he stood at a crossroads. Would he cling to the world he knew, safe, privileged, unquestioned? Or would he risk everything, even his own image, to honor the truth his daughter had just spoken? The choice was his, and every second of hesitation pulled him deeper into a moment he could never undo. The child's voice lingered, wispy, yet indelible. But instead of laughter, the park erupted with tension. Parents grasped their children tightly. Whispers grew more assertive. And then appeared the first mocking laugh, catchy, snipping through the air like a knife. Of course, someone had whispered, just loud enough for others to catch. Figures, her first word came from him. The father's chest constricted. The flower, the stranger had left her. His daughter held tightly, smiling proudly, not sensing the venom that swirled around her. But the gazes of the crowd closed in around them like a fortress. Every glance conveyed the same meaning. This is not right. This should not have occurred. The businessman stood up. His frame trembled, not with rage, but with a fear that was no longer manageable. For decades, he had constructed his existence on image, money, prestige, reputation. And now, all of it seemed to be falling apart beneath the crushing force of one inescapable fact. The miracle for which he had prayed had come through an individual society, had taught him to distrust. A voice in his mind screamed to pull her away, to erase the moment, to pretend it had never happened. But another voice, quieter, stronger, whispered that this was the very moment he had been waiting for his entire life. The stranger rose slowly, looking the father in the eye. No pride, no expectation of thanks, just serene dignity. He had given the child her first word, and in so doing, had provided the father with a choice. The father's throat was dry. His universe hung on a razor's edge. Would prejudice snatch this miracle from him, or would he be finally free of the terror that had dominated him for years? The park stood still. His daughter's little hand pulled at his arm, her eyes shining, her lips eager to attempt another word. And in that moment, the reality was unavoidable. Silence was not an option anymore. The father's breath shook as his daughter gazed up at him, her small voice still ringing in his ears. Judgment hung in the air around them, but for the first time, he didn't care. He knelt next to the black stranger, his voice cracking as he whispered a simple word he'd never thought he'd say. "Thank you." It was small, nearly overwhelmed by the shout of disapproval, but at that time, it was everything. His daughter had been heard. Her silence had been broken, and the man who presented her with that gift was standing tall, not because the world honored him, but because he had stood for compassion where others had stood for fear. They walked out of the park together that afternoon, but the father's life was irreparably changed. He had witnessed the ugly face of prejudice, his own included, and the extent to which it came to taking away the biggest miracle of his life. He knew that racism isn't always brutal or vocal. Sometimes it is a whisper at the back of your mind, a pause you can't quite explain, a wall you never realized you built. And if silence walls can silence a child for years, what are hate and bias walls doing to a whole community? This isn't a story about a single father, a single daughter, or a single man in a park. It's about us, about the times we stop, the moments we allow fear to be louder than truth. Therefore, the question still stands. When you are presented with the option between prejudice and compassion, between silence and justice, which path will you take?